Hello and welcome to 2025. Are you ready to talk about 2024? I don't know if you are, but I am, I think. Anyway, welcome to everyone who's new to my channel. Let's do this year together. Welcome back to all of you who have been with me for the last year or the last few months or just the last day. And yeah, I've got a lot to get through, so I'm going to stop jibber jabbering and get straight to it. Today in this video, I'm going to finish talking about all the books that I finished in the month of December, or at least since my last wrap up where I talked about books that I finished. I am going to wrap up the month of December, wrap up all of 2024, and that's it. That's all we're doing in this video, and I think that's going to be enough. So this week, I'm actually going to start by talking about a book that I DNF'd, and that was the audiobook that I was listening to of Ride the Wind. This is a historical fiction by Lucia St. Clair Robeson and tells the story of Cynthia Ann Parker, who is kidnapped by the Comanche Indians. This is based on a true story, basically, and I had picked this up, I want to say maybe over the summer, and then I stopped listening to it. And I decided, you know what, I still had it kind of just lingering there as a book I was reading, even though I hadn't listened to it for months. And I was like, let me just pick this book back up and either finish reading it or DNF it. And I decided to DNF it, and here's why. One was the characterization, two was the timeline and structuring of the novel, and the third had to do with content. So let me start by talking about the character. And the main character that I was really struggling with in here was actually the character of Cynthia Ann Parker, who is our protagonist. And it wasn't that I had a problem with her as a character per se, it was more her characterization that I was really struggling with. She, in this book, starts out at 9. At the point that I made it to in this book, which is about a third of the way into the book, she's still 9. It's only been 4 months. She feels, thinks, and acts more like a 19-year-old. And maybe if you read a lot of historical fiction, it would bother you less. But I just kept forgetting she was 9. And it causes problems in the book, because then there's times where you think everything that she's doing and that's happening to her to some extent is okay. And I'm talking about like after the fact she's kind of settled down with the Comanches. And then other times I'm like, wait a minute, this is a 9-year-old girl. I don't know about that. So it just became odd. I couldn't keep her age straight, and that was getting increasingly frustrating. The second thing brings me back to the timeline, which I think also had to do why I couldn't keep her age straight. Because I do think in the writing of this book itself, there are some times where things happen with her and she develops and she gets used to living with this Indian tribe. And like I said, I'm only a third of the way in. She's been living with them for about 4 months, but she's like completely settled in. Like, she's learned sign language, she communicates with them, she knows how to make things. She's a Comanche Indian at this point. And I'm just like, for someone who gets kidnapped, which is not a spoiler, that's literally the first sentence on the back of the book and the first thing that happens in this book, but for someone who gets kidnapped in a really violent fashion and has about a half day of PTSD and then needs to accept her kidnappers as her family and is supposedly a very mature 9-year-old, she gets over all of it really quickly and just like moves on with her life. And she's like, I barely remember my family. There's no time to do that. What? So again, just didn't seem realistic. And then I really couldn't combine the two things where she was 9, but she was 19. She's been with them for 4 months, but it feels like 4 years. Like, it was not working. It did not work for me. The two things, once you added them together, worked even less, and I was just constantly confused about her age, about how long it would be. But there comes another scene where, and this is actually probably the third scene in this book that's very graphic and violent, where a horrible situation is going on with somebody else that they've kidnapped. And it just goes into detail of what they're doing at a level that I do not think was necessary for the book. Like, I get that you want to describe, I guess, in some manner, just like how violent and horrible this setting was, but I don't think the extent to which it was described was necessary. I'm not here for that. I don't need that, especially when like there's other weird things going on in the book. I don't tend to like that in books in general. And so for me, that was a personal preference that this just wasn't going to work, especially since I was struggling with the characters and the timeline of the book to begin with. Long story short, because this is supposed to be a short review, I DNF'd this book. Next book I'm going to talk about is one that I did enjoy, and that was 4321. And what is this book about? Well, I watched an interview by the author, Paul Auster. In fact, I watched 2 or 3, where he talked about this book, and he really encouraged people to read the back of the book. He felt like that was the best synopsis of what this book is about, so I'll read a couple of short statements off of the back of here, which are ones that he highlighted in his own interviews. And that is that this book is about Ferguson, who is born at the beginning of the book. And from that single beginning, Ferguson's life will take 4 simultaneous and independent fictional paths. 4 Fergusons made of the same genetic material. 4 boys who are the same boy will go on to lead 4 parallel and entirely different lives. The intimate plot of each Ferguson story rushes on across the tumultuous and fractured terrain of mid-20th century America. One of the phrases that Paul Auster used in his interviews over and over again was the unexpected daily events that happen to us. He very much seemed to agree that this book was about nature and nurture, which was something I had been talking about when I've been talking about this book. And he really just emphasized this idea of how he just felt like we are shaped by unexpected events that happen in our lives. He didn't like the idea of fate. He didn't seem like a particularly religious person. And so that was how he talked about it. And I think that very much shows in this book. All 4 of those boys have the same parents, but he changes subtle things around them. He changes the events that happened to the Fergusons in the story. He changes the events that happen to their family members. And it's so interesting to watch that as these different unexpected events happen in their lives, how that shapes who Ferguson becomes. So in a lot of ways, this book is also sort of a Bildungsroman, a coming-of-age story for Ferguson. This was an extremely fascinating book. In my opinion, the highs in this book were definitely the themes. It was a theme that I enjoyed and I also thought was really well handled just in terms of the central ideas of nature versus nurture, the idea of coming of age, and just looking at like how does a character develop. This is definitely a character study, and I think it's a really well done one, and I think it just really explores like the idea of what makes a person and how do the things around us impact our lives really well. It's just really well done. The structure of this book is also really interesting. It's a little confusing at first, but he does try to give you hints of how it's structured just in the way the chapters are labeled. And like, he doesn't seem to think that's supposed to be a spoiler. And so it is broken up into 7 sections, which represent like 7 different stages in Ferguson's life. So you follow him from early childhood to sort of like an elementary age to a middle school, like preteen age to a teenager to college, and he stops right around the time that Ferguson's just post-college. And he also shared that the reason he did that was because he felt like the most impactful change in a person's life happens through those time periods, and so that's what he wanted to focus on in order to have basically action in the story. And I think that was really well handled as well. If I was going to say there is a low in this book, I would probably say it's the writing style. And it wasn't that I disliked the writing style. For me personally, it's not a style I typically read. It comes very close to stream of consciousness, though I wouldn't say it is. It's just very long sentences, very drawn out sentences. In fact, it reminds me a lot of Charles Dickens and his long sentences, or George Eliot's. So if you don't like that writing style, you might not like this. Or if you do like that writing style, you may really like how this is written. And if you'd like to try one of them, you may want to try this first if you don't read a lot of classics. So there's a lot of recommendations in terms of that. But it was a very intentional choice by Paul Auster. He said he wrote it like that because he felt like it drew you into the story and kept you moving through the book and through Ferguson's life. And I would agree with that. The reason I say it's a low, however, is because I felt like particularly in this book, the writing style at times would be very exhausting. I found that I could only read this in shorter blocks of time than usual until I was mentally exhausted and needed to go do something else or read something else. So given that it's a super long book, it could make it very long to read. That said, I was very invested in Ferguson's life. I did read the whole thing. I did enjoy the whole thing. In fact, I enjoyed it so much, it made me think maybe I could read more literary fiction or more like postmodern literature, because this is what that kind of felt like to me. Well, we'll see. That said, I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I was very pleasantly surprised by it, and I would recommend this book to anybody who likes character studies, who likes literary fiction and things more on that side, and who likes to look at, just life as a human and like what types of things impact who we are and likes to explore that idea. This is a great book for that. I would compare it to something like Life After Life by Kate Atkinson, or even to some extent The Midnight Library, but I would say it's probably closer to Life After Life. So if you don't mind a chunky version of that, you might want to try this. And the final book that I finished is The Souls of Black Folk by W.E.D. Dubois. This is a collection of essays that he wrote, and these essays cover a lot of things. But first of all, let me talk about W.E.D. Dubois, because I don't feel like I've said enough about him when I was talking about him over the last month or so. And I thought it was interesting to point out that he was the first African American to receive a PhD from Harvard University. He's a sociologist, a historian, and a novelist, and I think you see all of that in his writing. This book is beautifully written. His essays are immaculate. His writing is like definitely the high in this book, even if you don't agree with what he's saying, even if you don't like all of the essays just for personal reasons or whatever, or you don't like reading essays, I would still recommend reading one of these essays because the writing on its own is just beautiful. He opens his stories beautifully, he closes them beautifully, and each paragraph is just so well thought out. Like, this is probably some of the best writing that I've read in my life. And I will try, though I've said this in each video and I don't think I've done it yet, but I will try in the description box to finally remember to link my favorite essays from this book in the description box below if I can find them online. There was a lot of work he did in talking about the psychology of African Americans and African American culture, looking at all of that had just never been looked at before. Now, I'm not going to say that this is the most up-to-date, like, sociological, like, thought on any of these things, but it's really interesting to just see where it all started because he was basically one of the first people to do it. And the time period of this is in the early 1900s, published in 1903, and so you have it like after the Civil War, after Reconstruction, but before the Civil Rights Movement. And a lot of what he wrote here very much impacted and helped shape the direction of the Civil Rights Movement. So excellent book, highly recommend. There you go. Okay, so that's the last of my December TBR. Let's go and look at all the stats and graphics of what happened in December. So I read 9 books in the month of December. No idea how I pulled that off. But what I'm most impressed by is that average star rating. 4 stars. Yeah, that definitely feels right. And I also like the 3 highest books that it picked for me this month to display. I would definitely agree that those were my 3 highest rated books. Even though I think I had more than one 4-star this month, that is definitely the 4-star book that I would put in this graphic. So I'm really pleased with how this look turned out and how my reading month went. So I did also want to talk about my December cover collage. This one is super satisfying this month. All these books, love to see it. And yeah, I'm not going to reiterate all my thoughts on these books. I have summarized all my thoughts on them in my weekly reading wrap-ups. I just talked about the last 2, 4, 3, 2, 1, and The Souls of Black Folk, but this was just a really good reading month for me. And in fact, I read so many books this month that I forgot that I finished Zeno's Conscience at the beginning of this month. I really thought that was like one of last month's books, but apparently not. Apparently that was this month as well, so not complaining about it. And like I said, I had quite a few 4-star reads, but if I had to rank them, I too would probably put 4, 3, 2, 1 as my most favorite in the 4 stars. So yay for me. I'm really happy that I read all these books this month. Even my 3 stars really weren't horrible. They just weren't my favorite compared to the rest. So I think these numbers are pretty accurate. So here they are. Here's all the books I finished in the month of December. You saw how I rated them all. And like I said, you can see that some of them were definitely on the shorter side, which I think is how I pulled off a higher number this month. even though I had about the same number of pages. And also, if you're wondering and haven't seen my previous videos, how I only read 3,500 pages but have these two fat books at the end, this book on the very bottom, the black one, is The Mysteries of Paris, and I was read that book and have been reading that book since April, so I only had 100 pages of it that I had to read this month. And in fact, let's go look at the last chart because I think that'll explain everything slightly better. Here is a list of not just all the books that I finished, but all the books that I read and worked on in the month of December. And I appreciate the fact that they include this because my reading this month really was made up of some combination of all of these books. So the ones with the star ratings are the ones that obviously I finished at some point this month, whether or not I started them this month. You can see in this, it also includes the book that I DNF'd. And a new feature that they added in the month of December was to put the words pause on some of your books so that it wasn't making your stats odd. And pause basically just means you picked up the book and you decided to put it down and you're not continuing to read it. And I love this feature because it solved the issue that I was having with some of my omnibus books, like Oscar and Lucinda or The Tale of the Nutcracker, where there's more than one book combined together, and I don't necessarily want to read each book, but I also don't want to put it on the story graph as a different edition. I don't know if that makes sense, but basically you can pause in the middle of the book. So if you see XX, that's actually a book that I just stopped reading. I haven't DNF'd it. I do plan on reading it again, so it's literally I'm just in the middle of the book and doing nothing with it. That was a perfect place to use pause. You can also see the two books that I'm still currently reading, Nicholas Nickleby and Year of Wonder. So this is a very good representation of all of my December, even though it doesn't say page numbers for each of them. Now let's move on to the part that I'm probably most excited about, which is my 2024 wrap up. And for that, we're going to go directly over to the story graph. Okay, are you ready for this? I don't know if I'm ready for this. I will admit that I've already peeked at a little bit of this, but I have not looked at it all. All right, so here it is. It's telling me in my 2024 reading wrap up, like I said, all I need to do is under my stats is just click a little button and it sends me a little in-app notification when this is ready to view. And thank you. Yes, it was a wonderful reading year, the story graph. Couldn't have been as good without you. So the first thing that I am seeing here is that I finished 94 books this year. And outside the story graph, I really don't keep great track of this, so I'm going to take their word for it. This is a really cool little thing that they kept track of that I vaguely knew, which is the first book that I read this year was Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. And the last book that I read this year was The Souls of Black Folk. I feel like it would have been better bookended if I had made 4321 my last book. Then it would have been like, hey, here they both are. But I didn't do that because I wasn't thinking about that nonsense. Maybe I'll think about that next year. Probably not. This is a fun chart that was new to me this year because I saw this wrap up last year from the story graph and I don't think this was on here. So this is a mood map of my reading. So the lower the line is, apparently the darker the book. The higher the line goes, the lighter the book. So it seems like I've read some very dark books at the beginning of the year, hitting a low somewhere in February, and then slowly pulling myself out of it, which sounds about right for me as a reader. I don't tend to like very dark books, so I have the feeling what happened was my book started on the dark side, got darker, and I was like, no, and rebelled against it. And apparently I decided that December wasn't going to start the way, or I wasn't going to end the year the way it started because my lightest reads were in the month of December. Books read looks like I read the most books last January, which I feel like I recall. I feel like I read less and less books shortly after January. I think I might have burnt myself out a little bit there. And I definitely see that I have peaks and troughs. So I definitely read a lot and then go downhill for a little bit or have like a recovery month or something. And I think also based on number of pages read as well as number of books read, you can see on this chart when I was moving. Yay, I reached my page goal. Funny that it doesn't say what my page goal was, because I definitely don't remember. I think maybe I put it at 30,000. This year, I spent the most time reading classics, almost 40 of them. Wow, that's a lot. And my second highest genre was literary fiction, followed by historical, fantasy, and to me, a surprising number of mysteries. Looks like around 12 to 13. I had no idea I read that many mystery novels this year. And then my longest book, to the surprise of no one who's been following me for a while, was The Mysteries of Paris. There you go, according to Storygraph, including every single last page of the book. It was 1,392 pages. And in contrast, my shortest book was 26 pages. This is maybe a little bit off. I did read The Confessions of Nat Turner, but I actually printed it out. I don't know if there's more information in this actual book than in the PDF that I found online. And the three authors that I spent the most time with, this is another graphic that I'm like, really? Is that how it works out? Anyway, number 5, most read author this year, in 2024 anyway, is Wilkie Collins. Yep, absolutely. Read 5 of his books, really loved every single one. Charles Dickens is number 4, not intentional, but I enjoyed all of those as well, to varying degrees, not as much as my Wilkie Collins. Frank Herbert, this is the one that I'm like, what? And I'll be honest, he gets the 3 books because there were 3 Dune graphic novels that I read this year. And maybe I read Dune this year. I don't remember. But I know I definitely read 2 of his graphic novels this year. So it's not as impressive as it thinks if you're thinking Frank Herbert and you're thinking his massive tomes of Dune. No, that's not what I was reading. But I think it's hilarious that that's the number 3 author. My average star rating was 3.95. I'm not sad about that because I had a 1-star rated book this year, and I had a couple that were 2 stars. I had DNFs. So to get almost 4 as my average star rating, I feel like it's pretty good. Oh, and then some months were better than others. That's absolutely true. Apparently, July was my best month. I'm going to thank the Fandom Toll Booth for that one. Though I think that was also the month where I read Howard's End and Marina. And yeah, I think July was an awesome month now that I'm thinking about it. March apparently wasn't my favorite month. What did I read in March? I had an average rating of 3.21. Oh, I can think of one book that I probably read in March that brought everything down. And the most pages read happened in January. That number's gotta be wrong. I think I must not have updated something until January. But then again, January was also the month that I finished the most books in. So who knows? So here's the book that I read that was the most shelved, by me and others. I gave it a 5 star. So yeah, I can see why a lot of people have it on their shelves. This is the book that I read that was the least shelved, only 18 other people. It is out of print, so I can see how not a lot of people have this on their shelf, but it's an excellent book, especially if you want to learn more about Nat Turner and why that particular book by William Styron created such a controversy at a time. Because even though these 10 Black writers are giving their opinions on the William Styron's books, they also share some contextual information about historically what's happening. Okay, and then other than actually looking at specific pie charts and that kind of stuff, which I'll do on my own, I feel like they've kind of summarized most of the information here. I'm just gonna close the video by just scrolling down through pretty much every single book that I read in the year 2024. They have them all below, and so we can just look at that together as this video closes. Let me know how your 2024 went. Share any stats you feel like sharing down in the comments below. And yeah, from this point on, 2025, here we come. That's it for me, and I will talk to you next time. Bye.